from Ezekiel, and probably the last. I say probably the last because one never knows about these things. Ezekiel 45 is where we are on this occasion. We are basically into the divisions of the land, and the thing that strikes me most as I read through these and as I look at the diagrams of them, which you can find, as I've already pointed out, you've got some diagrams in the middle of the Living Bible of this particular, not only the temple, but also the geographical layout of distribution by tribe. As I look at the diagrams and so forth, you, of course, are painfully aware immediately of the fact that there is a major difference in topography in the area as a result of what's happening. And then when you see the diagrams, you also realize that when you start drawing your state lines or your borders in straight lines across like that, with no consideration for topography at all, it leads you to wonder to what extent the prophecy is literal and to what extent it's figurative, to what extent it is a spiritual situation that's being described as opposed to a physical. And there's no way, really, for us to know. Once you depart from the idea that this is describing something on the ground, from then on, you're really on your own if you're going to start saying, well, it's symbolic or it's figurative, unless somewhere you can find some key to the figures that are being given here, and there aren't in this particular case. So the best thing to do is to realize that what you are seeing here is being described for you here is a vision. And the meaning of that vision may be manifold, in fact. It may have a lot of different directions that it goes. But I won't spend much time with the diagrams and with those things because they're things you can read and you can look up and study for yourself. It talks, however, about an individual who is called the Prince, and he was in some measure introduced to us before. The Prince it's a kind of a curious term. The word in the English implies royalty. It does not. The Hebrew word for this does not imply royalty at all. In fact, when you go back to the fact that Jacob was to have 12 sons, these 12 sons are called 12 princes, or I think that they said that somebody suggested that the word leader would be more appropriate. But the problem with the word leader, that just simply implies a person who is strong and exercises leadership over other people, as opposed to a person who holds a particular office. Now, if you were to look this up, and you'll find quite a bit of it under prince, others you'll find under the word chief. The chief of the tribe of so-and-so, as you'll find in one place, actually is the same word. It's the prince of such and such. I think probably the English word chief is going to be a very good translation for the word that is here translated prince and elsewhere in here. And it has to do with people who are not, there isn't more than, of course, than one prince. There are princes or chiefs. And there are people who hold the different administrative offices. They are either, and of course, again, we're not talking for the most part about elected offices either. We're talking about patriarchal types of offices. In other words, the 12 sons of Jacob were patriarchs. They were the fathers of their tribe. And they were, by consequence of that, the chief of the tribe. The word chief, again, here translated as prince. It says in verse 7 of chapter 45, a portion shall be for the chief on the one side, and on the other side an oblation of the holy portion. Now, another sidelight, which I think I've already mentioned, is that there is no high priest. In all of this segment dealing with this temple, priests are mentioned, offerings are mentioned, oblations, sacrifices, and all that is mentioned. But there's never mentioned one of a priest, a high priest. What is intriguing about it is that in the place where you would expect to find the high priest, you find not the high priest, but the prince. And the implication of this is that Jesus, as high priest, has come. And he has established a kingdom, and he is our high priest. And yet you have some individual who serves as the chief of the priests. And he is called, in the English versions of this, generally speaking, or at least in the authorized version, the prince. Any of you have a different terminology for him in your Bible? Look at verse 7. A portion shall be for the prince. Do you have a different translation? Anyone? No? Oh, that's unusual. Somebody wouldn't have something different there. You have a different translation, but it's still the prince? Okay. What translation do you have? The new RSV still uses the term prince. That's interesting. It works as a translation, but it is, as I say, if you just find a common way of translating it everywhere, it'd be more useful. Okay, a portion shall be for the prince or the chief on the one side, and the other side an oblation for the holy portion. Oblation means something that's given to God. The word oblation means that which comes near to the altar. And they basically is an area of land that's given to God. By the way, the Hebrew word for oblation is korban, which Jesus mentions that if a man doesn't give something to his father and his mother because he says it's korban, that is, it's been brought to the altar, that's okay. Jesus' condemnation of the Pharisees in that situation was that they ignored, on the basis of religious grounds, they ignored a family responsibility of taking care of poor parents. I think that's an interesting thing all by itself. In the land shall be his possession Israel, and my princes shall no more oppress my people. Now, that little phrase there is striking in a way, because what we're talking about here is government as a source of oppression. Now, a lot of times you tend to think of oppression in terms of bandits, outlaws, or the money lenders, the bankers, people who oppress one another. Sometimes employers who oppress their employees, or slave owners who oppress their slaves. Here, government is portrayed as a major source of oppression. And I can see some faces saying, yeah, I understand that. That makes a whole lot of sense to me. Especially if you insert the word IRS for the word prince here, everything falls into place just like that, doesn't it? It says, the rest of the land shall they give to the house of Israel according to their tribe. Thus saith the Lord God, let it suffice you, O prince. Let what I have given you be enough for you, you chiefs. Remove violence and spoil, and execute judgment and justice, and take away your exactions from my people, saith the Lord. Now, this is a kind of an interesting little structure here. He's saying essentially that, look, we're going to draw out the inheritances of the land. You've got all the tribes are here, and around Jerusalem there's an area that's set off for the prince, for the chiefs. They have either an inheritance in the land, or they have this thing that was set apart for them by God in the diagram. And he says, let it suffice you. Let that be enough for you. He then goes on to say, stop violence and spoil. Stop and execute judgment and justice, and take away your exactions. Now, there's more than one way of looking at that. The first thing that comes to mind, since I've already mentioned the Internal Revenue Service, is to stop oppressing the people in the way that you tax them. But the Hebrew really doesn't quite run that way. The expression take away in the Hebrew is the word to lift, and the word for exactions is probably closer to dispossessions. A modern word for it would be foreclosure. Now, if you put it this way, essentially it is saying, lift your foreclosures off of my people. Now, one of the things that is condemned in the law of God is usury, the exaction of interest from people. Now, the point of it is not so much a question, in fact, it's not at all a matter of, let's say we have Mr. Dubry back here who's got lots and lots of money. He's really a very well-to-do person. He's grinning at me. We know that Mr. Dubry has to work for a living. But let's imagine him as a person who had bags and bags of money. If I go to him and say, look, I've got this business proposition for you, Leo. I want to do it, but I don't have enough money. Now, if you let me have some of your money to do this with, and I make any money out of this, I'll give you some of it. How's that for a precise deal? Okay? You put it down on paper. Yeah, right. I don't blame you at all. The point simply being that when you lend money to somebody to make money, this is a business arrangement that has to do with simply sharing the profits of whatever it is you're going to do with your money. The bank, for example, you put your money in the bank. If all the bank did was to have a vault and to protect your money and then to pay it out whenever you wanted to spend it, well, you really ought to pay them something for leaving it there. Because it's costing them something to take care of your money. Did any of you think that's what was happening to your money when you put it in the bank? No, of course not. When you put your money in the bank lends that money to somebody else. And they pay you 3%, and they charge that other person 8%. Is that a deal, or is that a deal? Yeah. Well, if it's home mortgages now are running a little over 8 or 8.5, something like that. If it's consumer mortgage, you bet. They charge them 18 to 24% in some cases. And don't you wish you could get in on a deal like that? The problem that comes about in this is that you begin to construct an economy in which the people who are doing most of the borrowing, and this, you shouldn't think about it for a minute, it has to work this way. The people who are doing most of the borrowing are people who don't have money. The people who are doing most of the lending are people who have money. We got that? That's real hard to figure out? All right. Now, in the process, now it's only natural. It's my money. I don't have to lend it. I can keep it. I can put it in a coffee can in the backyard. I can put it in 40 coffee cans if I have too much money. We can do all that stuff with money. We don't have to lend it to the poor. But here along comes a poor guy who's got to have a pickup truck to get to work. I mean, he can't get to work unless he's got transportation. And he can't earn any money. But if he doesn't have any money, he can't buy the truck to get to work, and he's caught. So he goes down to the bank or the loan company or his friendly loan shark and buys enough money to get him into this pickup truck. And goes to work, makes off the payments, and in the process, pays off several pickup trucks, over the years of what he wouldn't do. It's something that he, really has no choice in. Now, that is one slice of our economic pie in our civilization. There is a much larger slice of the economic situation that comes about from people who want things that they can live without, and salesmen who come along and sell them things that they can live without, which by itself isn't that bad, but they sell it to them on credit and charge them that 24% interest on an annualized basis. So you make the profit on the sale, and you hope that people borrow money on it. And then you set up revolving charge accounts like some of these stores do. And the whole idea is to keep you borrowed up to your credit limit so that you pay them money on a regular basis. It's like the old song, St. Peter, don't you call me because I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. Now, this is the kind of situation that is being described here, where the princes. Now, we're not, at this moment of time, talking about the wealthy person who's not in authority. We're talking about princes, that is, people who are in government. We're talking about, in the modern equivalent, the President of the United States, our senator, our congressman, and the whole batch of these people up there. And we tend to want to blame everybody and his dog out here for the oppression that takes place upon us as a people. But the fact of the matter is, all that oppression, or the lion's share of it, and the total responsibility for it, can be traced back to the biblical word is our princes. So he says, I want you guys to do, I want you people, who are the chief of the people, to stop oppressing the people. Now, riots, like have been going on this past weekend in Los Angeles, those who listen to these tapes in years to come, it's the one over the Rodney King decision I'm talking about, not the Watts riot. But for those, those people are oppressing their neighbors, surely. But that's something that comes along once in a blue moon. By far and away, the most serious oppression of the people comes from their own leadership and their own government. That is the potential for it, because of the power that accumulates in the hands of people. There always has to be power in the hands of someone to govern. And people are truly blessed, one of the Psalms or Proverbs says, that when the king is a man who rises early and takes care of his business and looks after the welfare of his people and does the things that kings, by divine right, are supposed to do. But woe to the people when their princes oppress them. Thus saith the Lord God, let it be enough for you, princes of Israel. Remove violence and spoil. Execute judgment and justice. Lift your repossessions, your foreclosures from my people. You shall have just balances and a just ephah and a just bath. These are all just simply, he says you're to have a bureau of standards. And you are to enforce your bureau of standards. Now, somewhere, it used to be there was a safe up in Washington, D.C. that was air conditioned and kept at a constant temperature, in which there was I think it was a platinum ruler upon which the dimensions of, 1 foot and 1 inch and the standards were all maintained. That there were weights in there that were 1 ounce. That all these things were there against which other types of scales and balances and all this type of thing could be judged. And so you can by, I don't know, I suppose they still have, don't they, people in cities and towns that go around checking on the butchers to see if they're using honest scales or not? They do. I know they used to have. Pardon? The state operates that. Sort of a random check or a systematic check, whereby they'll go in and pop their weight on the scale and see if you're over. Because, as a butcher, it's a real easy thing, to just put a little fishing weight, attach it underneath your scale there, and you flap the meat on it there, and you get an extra ounce every time you sell a steak to somebody. And everybody knows that how easy that's done and how often it is done. How many people, jokes that comedians used to tell a lot about buying the butcher's thumb several times over, Unless you plan on cutting that thumb off and giving it to me, get it off the scale. That's what you ought to tell him. Anyway, he said, you ought to have these things, they are to be just. And the shekels shall be 20 gerahs, 20 shekels, 5 and 20 shekels, 15 shekels shall be your manna. In other words, here it just lays out. There's supposed to be a complete set of standards for all of these things. Now remember, this is in vision. In the actual fulfillment of the vision, what he is simply saying is, your money is to be constant, your weights are to be constant, your measures are to be constant, and you're not supposed to be cheating people by currency manipulation, which is done all the time, more ways than you and I could imagine. He goes on to say what the prince's job was. It shall be the prince's part to give burnt offerings, verse 17, and meat offerings and drink offerings in the feast and the new moon. How about that? They'll be observing the new moon. Now, just as a little quiz for you right now, why will they be observing new moon and we are not? Anybody here know? Now, it's so simple. If you sat and thought about it for a few minutes, you should be able to figure this out. Okay? I'm sorry? Yeah, well, don't you recognize it when you go out there and say, hey, that's the new moon tonight? Oh, well, yeah, you got it on your wrist and the watch. I got it on mine. Mine doesn't. Mine drifts. If I had to rely on my watch, I'd never know when a new moon was. Because I hardly ever do anyway. But why them and not us? Well, let me give you a hint. What did the law command relative to new moon? And to whom did it give that commandment? Did any of you know? I'm sorry? You're too far away to participate in this. What is it? The commandment was given to the Levitical priesthood. Right. What did they do? Made sacrifices. They had specific sacrifices that were to be done, and something else. They had to blow trumpets. Okay? What else was commanded relative to the new moon? Nothing. Nothing. Now, if you and I wanted to observe a new moon today, according to the law, what would we do? The law, nothing. There is no commanded assembly. There is not a Sabbath day or a day of rest, so you can go to work on a new moon. There is no commanded assembly, so you don't have to go to church. Now, the question then has to do with some of the references in the Bible where new moons become very important. Make no mistake about it. When there is a temple there, when there is a priesthood there, and when the offerings and all the things that were done by the priesthood on the new moon were done, the new moon became a monthly, I don't want to use the word holiday because that implies everybody took off work. It doesn't. It becomes a monthly celebration. Potluck. Potluck had a lot more meaning, when you boiled your meat in the pot and put the hook in it and took out what you were lucky enough to get, It was everybody, since there were more sacrifices on the new moon, there was more to eat. And it was a major festival day. Let's all get together and have a meal on the new moon. But in a time and an age where there is no temple, no priesthood performing sacrifices, the new moon, well, what do you want to do on the new moon? Have a Bible study? Okay, fine, have one. But there is nothing in the Bible, really to connect that up other than the fact that, let's say, we wanted to go outside and say, well, it's a new moon tonight. And this is a good night to get together. It's a good night to go have supper. It's a good night to get together with friends. It's a good night to do all that. But that's you and I talking. That's just our idea about what we'd like to do relative to the new moon. And that's okay. Just don't ever try to imply to anybody that it's commanded, because it isn't. Now, let's see, where were we? All these things will be done, the new moons and all the festivals. In the first month, verse 21, in the 14th day of the month, you shall have the Passover, a feast of 7 days. Now, that scripture is worth marking because in our own terminology, our usage, we speak of the Passover as being a nighttime festival in the Old Testament, and the days of unleavened bread being a 7-day festival. But by this time, certainly, and in some aspects of biblical usage, the Passover is a feast of 7 days. The Passover is the lamb that was killed at the evening just before sundown went down, beginning these 7 days. The Passover meal was eaten after sundown on what's called the night to be much observed, which was the old night of the Passover. But the feast of the Passover is a feast of 7 days, not just one. And during those 7 days, as it says here, you shall eat unleavened bread. Unleavened bread shall be eaten all that time. Upon that day, the prince shall prepare for himself and for all the people of the land a bullock for a sin offering. 7 days of the feast he shall prepare a burnt offering to the Lord. 7 bullocks, 7 rams without blemish daily, the 7 days, and a kid of the goats daily for a sin offering. This harkens back, remember, to all those offerings that we saw back in Numbers. Those of us who were studying that, where on each of the festivals had its own specified offerings that were to be done on every day. Here we come back into this again. He shall prepare a meal offering of an ephah for a bullock, an ephah for a ram, and a hin of oil for an ephah. In the 7th month and the 15th day of the month shall he do like in the feast of the 7 days. This is interesting. It doesn't call it the Feast of Tabernacles. It calls it the 7 days. We call it the Feast of Tabernacles and keep it for 8 days because we have tied that 8th day, that is the last great day, as considering it really a part of the festival, and it's awfully hard not to do so. Now, beginning in chapter 46, we have some very, very detailed instructions. And it's difficult to just spiritualize this stuff away and say, well, it's all figurative, because it is so explicit. For example, you come down here later on, and it even tells you, how they're to come into the temple area, how they're to go out of it. They're to come in by the north gate and go out by the south gate. All these things are really fascinating. Verse 9, when the people of the land shall come before the Lord in the solemn feast, the man that enters in by the way of the north gate to worship shall go out by way of the south gate. And he that enters in by the way of the south gate shall go forth by the way of the north gate. You don't go back the way you came in. You'll go through opposite. In other words, you have 2 lines of people coming through to do what they're going to do. And you don't come in there and mill around. You come in the south gate and you go out the north gate, and vice versa, in 2 straight lines. It's all an orderly way of doing it. Now, it's hard to find a way of calling that figurative, or spiritualizing that, because it seems to be so much to do with order on the ground. It's just keeping order right here on the ground. Later in this chapter, it says in verse 16, thus saith the Lord God, the prince, shall give a gift. If the prince shall give a gift to any of his sons, the inheritance thereof shall be his sons. It shall be their possession by inheritance. But if he give a gift of his inheritance to one of his servants, then it shall be to the year of liberty, and it shall return to the chief, that is, to the prince. But his inheritance shall be his sons for them. In other words, if I were the prince, I could give you something until the year of release. At that time, it returned to me. I could not deny my own sons their inheritance by trying to give it away by whatever reason. Why would anyone do that? Debt, insanity, not being right in the head, because people do get that way from time to time. Maybe getting old and feeble and having someone take advantage of it. That ever happen to anybody? Sure it does. It happens all the time. But the prince, that is the chief prince or leader, could not do that. Moreover, the chief shall not take of the people's inheritance by oppression to thrust them out of their possession. You can't go out there and confiscate their land. Obviously, our Constitution would have to be changed to have it to where, the government couldn't come in and take your inheritance that you're trying to save up and leave for your children. It can't be done. Texas, many years ago passed what's called the Homestead Act. And you can file a homestead claim on your home. And if you lose a lawsuit and you're forced to go bankrupt because you have to pay all the debts that you've got, they cannot take your home. Can't be done. And you're there, and you can stay there indefinitely. There are some claims, I think, that can be put on a homestead, like taxes. The IRS, can do it. Can the state taxes do it? Or county taxes take your homestead? Property taxes, they can do that. So if you don't pay your taxes, they can take it away from you even here. But the whole idea is the person ought to be able to have his inheritance. And when the Bible speaks of inheritance, it's not talking so much about bank accounts and silver and gold. It's talking about land. That the whole idea of the way the land was structured is that your inheritance in the land is secure to your family forever. You can't sell it. You can't give it away. You can't lose it in the crap game. None of those things can happen. You cannot do it. And this is simply an encouragement beyond that. And so it goes further to say that the chief, that is the governor, is not allowed to take it away from you either. So your homestead, as it might be called, that which belongs to your family home, can never be touched. He says he shall give his sons inheritance out of his own possession. He's not going to go out and take yours away and give it to his children. Anyway, there is more in terms of the descriptions all the way through and up into chapter 47, which is really seems, and this is, commentary brought out that in this area, the biblical prophets do not recognize the distinctions that you and I like to try to draw between the millennium and the post-millennium period and all this. And the description of this river is so evocative of Revelation and of the final river of life that flows out of Jerusalem that it's awfully hard to see it as being a completely and a totally different thing. And yet, it does seem to be millennial in this sense. First of all, he gives him a measuring rod, and they go out into this river, and they stick down, and it's up to his ankles. And they go out a little further, and it's up to his knees. He goes out a little further, and it's up, around his chest. And finally, he gets up to his neck, and beyond that, he just keeps on going. It's a river no man would have to swim, and he couldn't swim over it because it's too far. So, and I think we have gone 1.33 miles before he gets up to his neck, and you still got that much more river as he's making its way. It makes its way on out there. It's a huge thing. Now, this leads you to feel that what you are reading here is figurative, because remember, the man is in vision, and the whole idea is that out of Jerusalem, out of the temple where the throne of God is, flows a river of life. And the oceans are healed. The point being that the oceans have been poisoned, every living thing has died in the sea. Remember all this stuff in Revelation. And then here flows this stream of living waters back into it, and things start coming back to life. It is interesting to read through and to see what happens here. The death and the seas that has taken place in Revelation is reversed. That would imply, certainly, a millennial setting, an early millennial setting, for this river coming out of the temple at that time. It's interesting, in verse 11 it says, the miry places and the marshes thereof shall not be healed. They're going to be given to salt. Now, you think, well, why not? Why not heal those too? Well, it's because they're given to salt. Do you get it? Salt is valuable. Salt is important. You salt your food with that. We don't want to heal everything that's salty, or we won't have any salt left. Leo, put salt around. For those of you who might be listening on tape, he said somebody told him to leave a ring of salt around where the bark joins the wood on the stump in order to kill the stump. Worked. Anyway, considering this one here, that all of this is laid out. It says, it shall come to pass, verse 22, that you divide the land by lot for inheritance to you, and to the stranger that sojourns among you, which shall beget children among you, they shall be like they're born in the country. Aha, now we got something else that's rather different. This old idea, and many people seem to have this idea that the Jews of old, that no Gentiles would be a part of their religion, is totally false. They could throughout the Old Testament. And here is a provision in the millennium. He says if they live among you and they have children among you, they are to be like someone that was born in the land. And I presume then that any law that says to every man that's Israelite born is going to live in tents for 7 days, well, that implies the stranger too. Because if he moves in among you and he lives among you, he's to be as one born in the land. He is to have an inheritance. You give him a homestead. And make that homestead secure to him, to the stranger. There are laws, of course, way back when that says you shall not oppress the stranger that comes among you, because you yourselves were strangers in the land of Egypt. The remainder of it is just simply the layout, really, of the land and how they're supposed to handle it as far as not giving it away or not selling it off and so forth. And that basically ties up. The book of Ezekiel ends in midair. There seems to be no conclusion on it. Whether there was one sometime and it was lost, or whether this is just the way it finished, you'd kind of think Ezekiel would say, well, folks, that's my vision. That's all the visions I had, and hope they meant something to you, or whatever. Some kind of conclusion. But he does not give one at all. I'm sorry? He came out of his vision, but you still think he had written something after he woke up. Actually, he may have died before he actually, with the full intent of adding something to this. We have no way of knowing that. Well, that is Ezekiel, folks. A stranger living in the land had to abide by the laws of the land. No, a stranger living among them could not have their own God. I feel quite certain that is true. The wording of all this, the whole idea of the stranger coming among them in Israel is not merely settling among us because we got good soil over here. It's a sharing in everything, including our religion and our faith. I don't think that law would permit a worshiper of Moloch to settle down over here and burn his children alive next door to you and be left unmolested in the process. Not for a moment. Any other questions? Well, we've made it through the book of Ezekiel. It is a long book. It has been, I think, an interesting study. It's a difficult book in many ways, but a great deal of the difficulty of Ezekiel is similar to that of Revelation and the other prophets, is that they got their material in vision. God appeared to them, an angel appeared to them, they went into a trance, and they saw things. And in these visions, people would come and speak to them. It might be an angel that comes and speaks to them, or a man comes and speaks to them, a man with a measuring rod. It is striking, as you read these visions, how many times there are similarities between them. For example, here, the man takes him out, and they get into a river up to their ankles, and they wade on out up to their knees, and they go on out further until it's up to the neck. And along the banks of this river, there are trees growing that bear all manner of fruits, and and the leaves are for the healing of the nation. You don't have to think a lot to figure out what that means, essentially. It means there's going to be plenty to eat. It means that sick and diseased people are going to be healed. And then you come to the book of Revelation. And in the kingdom of God, this is when the millennium is over, and the new heavens and the new earth, once again, there's this river flowing out of Jerusalem to the former sea and the hinder sea, and healing all the waters. And along its banks grow trees with all manner of fruits, and the leaves are for the healing of people who are sick. When you think about this now for a moment, knowing what we know about the Bible and about what God has done with people, if you have to conclude, well, that river is figurative. If you came back during the millennium and you went to Jerusalem, you wouldn't be able to wash your feet in that particular river. What then do you think it might mean? A form of government going out to the world? Any scripture that comes to mind that might back that up? Now, there's an interesting statement that Jesus himself made. That I think is so important. And if memory serves, didn't he make this statement? I didn't look this up before I came here. I should have. Did he make this statement perhaps in connection with the last great day of the festival? He that believeth on me, out of his belly shall flow forth rivers of living water. Remember that statement? He that believes on me, out of his belly shall flow forth rivers of living water. What did that mean? Well, he spoke of the Spirit which God would give, to mankind. In other words, this river flowing out from here, I think symbolizes that. Literal river, perhaps. There was a river in the vision. What did the river mean? Did it mean a river of H2O flowing down from Jerusalem to the seas? Perhaps so. But it means more than that, surely, especially in view of Jesus' analogy. And the fact is, he seems to be telling us that as individual Christians, that if we really believe in him, that out of us, we will become sources, as it were, of living water, that when our lives touch other people's lives, that it will be for the healing of people. I don't mean necessarily that you're going to clap hands on somebody and say, be healed, and the lame are going to jump up and walk. That's not the kind of healing I'm talking about. I'm talking about having an effect on people in the sense of healing the broken heart, of encouraging the faint-hearted, of lifting up people who are discouraged and despondent, that we become a source for the Spirit of God to move into the lives of people and to change those lives. And here, then, I think that when you talk about from Jerusalem and from the throne of God flows something out that heals the seas. In the Bible, the seas are often used of multitudes of people. So if it is metaphor, if it is symbolic in that sense, what it is talking about is the flowing out of the Spirit of God over multitudes and multitudes of people. And all these multitudes of poisoned waters will be healed. And the water is so rich that trees grow on its banks with all kinds of delicious and sweet fruit. And there are leaves that you can take and you can make medicines from them. And people's pains and sicknesses will be relieved. It's not hard to figure that what he's really saying here is that the power of God, as it begins to move into the world, will begin to put an end to the sickness and the hurt and the disease and the pain through which people have got to suffer. Ezekiel is a fascinating prophet, and I have enjoyed the study. And you can tell your friends that you were there the day we finally finished it with tape number 19.